Glass walls. The Blackwood estate sprawled across 5 acres of manicured perfection, its modern glass architecture reflecting the California sunshine like a private crystal kingdom. Inside, 24-year-old Josephine Blackwood stood in the center of the kitchen, her slender frame rigid with barely contained fury as she stared at the shattered remains of a crystal vase. "How many times do I have to explain the proper way to handle the Baccarat collection?" Her voice cut through the silence, each word precisely enunciated in the finishing school accent that had been cultivated since childhood. "These pieces cost more than you make in a month, Lucia." Lucia Mendez, 32 and with 7 years of service to the Blackwood family, kept her eyes lowered as she knelt to clean the mess. "Lo siento, Miss Josephine. It slipped when I was dusting." "It slipped," Josephine repeated, her tone dripping with derision. "Just like the Ming Dynasty teacup last month? Just like my mother's silver frame before that?" She swept her hand through her perfect blonde bob, a gesture that reminded everyone present of Camilla Blackwood, the family matriarch who had passed away 3 years prior. The household staff froze in their activities, pretending to be busy while watching the scene unfold. It wasn't the first time Josephine had lashed out, but something about today felt different, more brittle. "Perhaps if you spent less time on your phone and more time focusing on your actual responsibilities," Josephine continued, her voice rising, "you wouldn't keep destroying irreplaceable family heirlooms." Lucia's hands trembled slightly as she gathered the glass fragments. "I wasn't on my phone, miss. Don't contradict me," Josephine snapped, then glanced around at the watching staff. "What are you all staring at? Don't you have jobs to do?" As the staff scattered, Josephine caught sight of something unexpected. Tears welling in Lucia's dark eyes, quickly blinked away but unmistakable. For a brief moment, Josephine faltered, a flicker of something crossing her face before the mask settled back into place. "Just clean it up properly," she said, her voice slightly less sharp. "And be more careful." She turned and walked away, her footsteps echoing on the marble floor as she retreated to her wing of the house. Once alone, Josephine sank onto the edge of her bed, staring at her reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the Pacific Ocean. The woman who stared back looked composed, beautiful, and utterly alone. Her phone buzzed with a notification. Another charity gala tomorrow night. Another opportunity to stand beside her father as the perfect Blackwood heiress while he courted investors for his latest tech venture. Richard Blackwood had built Black Star Technologies into a Fortune 500 company, and since her mother's death, Josephine had stepped into the role of hostess and family representative. She swiped away the reminder and instead found herself scrolling through photos from college before she'd dropped out to help her father before her mother's death, when she'd had actual friends and dreams of her own. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Miss Josephine?" It was Edmund, the butler. "Your father called. He wanted to remind you about tomorrow's event. The car will be ready at 7. "Thank you, Edmund," she replied automatically. When he'd gone, Josephine walked to her window and pressed her palm against the cool glass. From here, she could see Lucia crossing the grounds toward the staff quarters, her shoulders slightly hunched. Something uncomfortable twisted in Josephine's chest, something that felt strangely like shame. The apology. The Oceanside Foundation Gala transformed the Blackwood Estate's grand ballroom into an ethereal seascape of blue and silver. Josephine moved through the crowd in a tailored midnight blue gown, playing her role perfectly, smiling at investors, charming philanthropists, and making the connections her father valued so highly. Yet her mind kept returning to the incident with Lucia the day before. "You're distracted tonight," observed Richard Blackwood, appearing at her side with 2 champagne flutes. At 58, he remained imposing, tall and lean with steel-gray hair and the intense focus that had built his empire. "The Peterson merger negotiations are here. I need you sharp." "I'm fine, Father," Josephine replied, accepting the champagne without drinking it. Her gaze had caught on Lucia, who was quietly refilling hors d'oeuvres trays at the edge of the room. In the 7 years Lucia had worked for them, Josephine realized she knew almost nothing about the woman, Richard followed her line of sight. "Is there a problem with the staff? I can have Edmund address it." "No," Josephine said quickly. "Everything's fine, but it wasn't fine." As the evening progressed, the discomfort in Josephine's chest grew until it became unbearable. When her father clinked his glass to make the customary speech about the Foundation's achievements, Josephine made a decision that would alter the course of many lives. "I'd like to say something as well," she announced, stepping forward before her father could object. The room quieted, all eyes turning to the Blackwood heiress. "The Oceanside Foundation talks about dignity and opportunity for all," she began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "But true dignity begins with acknowledging our own mistakes." She took a breath. "Yesterday, I behaved appallingly toward someone who has served our family with dedication and grace for years." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Richard's expression hardened. "Lucia," Josephine said, turning toward the startled housekeeper who had frozen near the kitchen doors. "I owe you a public apology. My behavior was inexcusable, and I am deeply sorry." The silence in the room was absolute. Lucia's eyes widened in disbelief, and several guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. This was not how the elite apologized, if they apologized at all. "Thank you for your patience and professionalism," Josephine continued, meeting Lucia's gaze directly. "I hope you can forgive me." As she stepped back, Josephine caught sight of Thomas Reed, her father's 30-year-old financial advisor, watching her with an expression of thoughtful surprise. Unlike the other executives who surrounded her father, Thomas had always treated Josephine as more than just Richard Blackwood's daughter. Later, as the guests began to depart, Richard cornered his daughter on the terrace. "What was that display about?" he demanded. The Petersons were shocked. "Good," Josephine replied, surprising herself with her steadiness. "Maybe they should be shocked more often. This isn't like you, Josephine. Since when do you concern yourself with the household staff?" "Maybe that's the problem," she said quietly. "Maybe I've never concerned myself enough with the people around me." Before her father could respond, Thomas approached, his tall figure silhouetted against the ballroom lights. "Mr. Blackwood, the Harcourt Group is asking for you." Richard gave his daughter one last measuring look before striding away. Thomas lingered, his expression curious. "That was unexpected," he said, his voice lacking the judgment she'd anticipated. "Was it wrong?" Josephine asked, suddenly uncertain. Thomas shook his head. "I think it might be the most right thing I've seen in this house in a long time." He hesitated, then added, "People can surprise you, Josephine. Sometimes even themselves." As he walked away, Josephine spotted Lucia preparing to leave for the night. Their eyes met across the emptying ballroom, and Lucia gave a small, tentative nod. Not quite forgiveness, but perhaps the beginning of something new. That night, Josephine couldn't sleep. For the first time in years, the glass walls of her perfect life seemed visible to her, and suddenly, terribly fragile. Hidden lives. The neighborhood where Lucia lived was only 20 miles from the Blackwood estate, but it might as well have been another world. Josephine felt conspicuous as she parked her Tesla on the street, lined with modest apartment buildings and small, well-kept homes. She had called ahead, half expecting Lucia to refuse her visit, but the housekeeper had agreed with cautious politeness. Apartment 3B was at the top of a narrow staircase. Josephine hesitated before knocking, suddenly aware of how bizarre this situation was. The employer's daughter showing up unannounced on a Sunday afternoon. Lucia opened the door, surprise flickering across her face at seeing Josephine actually there. She wore jeans and a simple blouse, her dark hair loose around her shoulders instead of in its usual neat bun. She looked younger, more relaxed, and completely different from the woman who moved quietly through the Blackwood mansion. "Miss Josephine, please come in," she said, stepping aside. "Just Josephine, please," she replied, entering a small but immaculately kept living room where textbooks were spread across a coffee table. The apartment smelled of something delicious cooking, nothing like the sophisticated cuisine their chef prepared. "My brother is making pozole," Lucia explained, following her gaze toward the tiny kitchen where a young man stirred a large pot. "Victor, this is Josephine Blackwood." Victor, who couldn't have been more than 20, gave a surprised nod. The one from the big house? You're famous around here. Victor, Lucia chided gently. He's joking, she told Josephine. Mostly? Are those college books? Josephine asked, gesturing to the textbooks. Lucia nodded. I'm taking night classes at the community college. Business administration, while working full-time for us. Josephine couldn't keep the surprise from her voice. Education was everything to our parents, Victor explained. Lucia puts me through engineering school and still makes time for her own classes. The revelation left Josephine momentarily speechless. The woman who had cleaned her home for 7 years had a life, dreams, and responsibilities that Josephine had never bothered to learn about. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of an elderly woman with Lucia's same warm eyes, introduced as their grandmother, Abuela Elena. To Josephine's surprise, the older woman embraced her without hesitation. So you are the one Lucia talks about, Elena said, with a knowing smile. The girl with the sad eyes in the glass house. Abuela, Lucia protested, but Elena waved her off. It is good you are here, she continued. Sometimes we must see how others live to understand our own lives better. Over a meal that was more flavorful and joyful than any Josephine could remember at the Blackwood estate, she learned the story of the Mendez family, how Lucia and Victor had lost their parents in an accident 6 years ago, how Lucia had taken the job with the Blackwoods to support her brother and grandmother, how she worked extra shifts to pay for both their educations. Why didn't you ever say anything? Josephine asked as Lucia walked her to her car later. About school, about your family? Lucia gave a small shrug. No one ever asked. The simple answer hit Josephine like a physical blow. I'd like to change that, she said quietly. If you'll let me. On her drive home, Josephine's phone rang. Thomas Reed, calling about some foundation paperwork that needed her signature. You sound different, he remarked when she answered. Everything okay? I'm just seeing things clearly for the first time, she replied. It's overwhelming. There was a pause before Thomas said, I always thought there was more to you than you let people see, Josephine. Maybe you're finally seeing it too. His words stayed with her as she returned to the empty mansion, where Edmund informed her that her father had flown to New York for an emergency board meeting. Alone in the house that had never truly felt like home, Josephine made a decision that would set in motion the events of the coming weeks, events that would change not just her life, but many others as well. Bridges built. The Blackwood Foundation office overlooked the harbor, its gleaming glass and steel architecture a testament to Richard Blackwood's vision. Josephine sat at the conference table with Thomas and Lucia, surrounded by spreadsheets and proposal drafts for what they were calling the Horizon Scholarship Program. The foundation already has an education initiative, Thomas pointed out. His sleeves rolled up as he reviewed the numbers. But it's focused on technology and innovation. Nothing like this. This is about creating opportunities for service workers and their families, Josephine explained, the passion in her voice surprising even herself. Full scholarships, living stipends, childcare support, whatever they need to pursue education while working. Lucia, still uncomfortable in the executive setting but growing more confident, added, Many of my co-workers have given up on education because they can't afford to work less. It's not about ability, it's about access. Over the past 3 weeks, the unlikely trio had formed a powerful alliance. Josephine provided the Blackwood name and connections, Thomas contributed financial expertise, and Lucia offered the essential perspective of those the program would serve. Their working sessions often ran late into the evening, fueled by takeout and a growing sense of purpose. Your father returns from New York tomorrow, Thomas reminded Josephine gently. We'll need his approval to redirect foundation funds. Josephine nodded, tension visible in her shoulders. He won't understand why this matters to me. Then make him understand, Lucia said with unexpected firmness. You're not the same person you were a month ago, Josephine. The unspoken question hung in the air. Would Richard Blackwood see the change in his daughter as growth or betrayal? The answer came the following afternoon in Richard's private office, where Josephine presented the proposal while Thomas and Lucia waited anxiously outside. "This is what you've been doing while I was gone?" Richard asked, flipping through the meticulously prepared documents. "Creating a charity program with my financial advisor and our housekeeper?" "It's more than charity," Josephine countered. "It's addressing a systemic barrier to education." Richard studied his daughter with narrowed eyes. "And what prompted this sudden social consciousness? You've never shown interest in the Foundation's actual work before." "I never thought I had anything real to contribute," she admitted. "I was just playing a part, the perfect Blackwood heiress. But this is something I believe in." Their conversation was interrupted when Richard's assistant announced an unexpected visitor, Eleanor Winters, chairwoman of the Black Star Technologies Board and Richard's longtime rival within the company. "Eleanor," Richard greeted her stiffly, "this is a surprise." "I heard whispers about an interesting new initiative," Eleanor replied, her keen eyes taking in the situation. At 62, she was a formidable presence in business circles and had often challenged Richard's more traditional approach. "Something about education access for service workers?" Richard's expression darkened. "News travels fast." "Word spreads when something has merit," Eleanor countered, turning to Josephine. "I'd like to hear more about this program, directly from you." To everyone's surprise, Josephine presented the proposal with clarity and conviction, explaining how the program could transform lives while creating loyalty and opportunity within the company's ecosystem. When she finished, Eleanor smiled. "I've waited years for a Blackwood to propose something this forward-thinking," she said. "The board will support this, with or without your approval, Richard." After Eleanor left, Richard studied his daughter with new eyes. "You've never stood up to me before," he observed. "Not like this." "I never had something worth fighting for," Josephine replied. Later, as they shared the news of the board's preliminary approval with Lucia and Thomas, Josephine found herself standing close to Thomas, their hands brushing momentarily. The connection sent an unexpected warmth through her, a feeling that had been growing during their late nights working together, their shared purpose creating a bond neither had anticipated. "We did it," Thomas murmured, his smile reaching his eyes in a way that made Josephine's heart beat faster. "We're just getting started," she replied, suddenly certain that she was talking about more than just the scholarship program. Constellations, 6 months later, the Horizon Scholarship Program's inaugural ceremony transformed the Blackwood Estates Gardens into a celebration of new beginnings. 20 recipients, household staff, groundskeepers, cafeteria workers, and their family members, received their acceptance packages amid applause and tears of joy. Josephine stood at the podium, no longer the cold, isolated woman she had once been. "Today marks not just the beginning of your educational journeys, but a transformation in how we view community and opportunity," she told the gathering. "Each of you has stars within you waiting to be discovered." In the front row, Lucia sat beside her grandmother and brother. Victor, now an engineering intern at Black Star Technologies, thanks to a recommendation from Richard Blackwood himself. Beside them sat Thomas, whose proud smile contained something deeper when he looked at Josephine. The program had exceeded expectations, attracting positive press and inspiring similar initiatives at other companies. Even Richard had come around grudgingly at first, then with growing pride as he witnessed his daughter's leadership and vision. After the ceremony, as twilight descended on the garden and guests mingled beneath strings of lights, Lucia found Josephine adjusting flower arrangements. "Old habits," Josephine explained with a self-deprecating smile. "I still need everything to be perfect." "Some things should be," Lucia agreed, then hesitated. "I've been offered a management position in the foundation to help run the scholarship program." "That's wonderful," Josephine exclaimed. "Although I'll miss seeing you around the house." "I think we've both outgrown our old roles," Lucia said softly. "You were never meant to be just your father's daughter." "And I was never meant to be just your housekeeper." They embraced, the months of working together having forged a friendship that transcended their former positions. Later, Josephine escaped the crowd and wandered to the cliffside overlooking the ocean. Thomas found her there, his familiar footsteps announcing his presence before he spoke. "Hiding from your own success?" he asked, coming to stand beside her. "Just taking it in," she replied. "Everything's different now." "You're different," he corrected gently. "You've found your purpose, Josephine. It's been remarkable to watch." The ocean breeze caught her hair as she turned to him. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." "That's not true," Thomas said, his voice serious. "You just needed to believe in something, including yourself." Under the vast canopy of stars, Josephine felt the last of her glass walls dissolve. "And what do you believe in, Thomas?" His answer came not in words, but in the gentle way he reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers as naturally as if they'd been doing it for years. "I believe some constellations are only visible when the right stars align." In the distance, laughter drifted from the garden where Lucia was dancing with her grandmother, where Richard Blackwood was actually smiling as he spoke with Eleanor Winters, where people from different worlds had come together to celebrate possibility. "My mother used to say that true worth isn't in what you have, but in what you give," Josephine said softly. "I never understood what she meant until now." Thomas's arm slipped around her waist, drawing her closer. "What do you want to give next?" Josephine smiled, leaning into his embrace as she gazed at the celebration below. A new kind of family formed not by obligation or circumstance, but by choice and respect. "Something real," she answered. "Something that lasts." And as Thomas's lips met hers in a kiss that felt like coming home, Josephine Blackwood realized that the distance between stars was never as vast as it seemed, that sometimes the most unlikely connections created the most beautiful constellations.